When my father died, I thought the hardest part would be grieving him. I was wrong. The hardest part started 3 weeks later when his lawyer called and asked me to come to his office for the reading of the will. At that point, I wasn't thinking about money. My dad and I had always been close, but during the last few years of his life, especially after my mother passed away, that relationship became even stronger. I was the one who drove him to appointments, helped with repairs around the house, and spent weekends with him when everyone else seemed too busy. I never kept score. He was my father. That's what family does. At least, that's what I believed. The day of the will reading felt strangely quiet. My aunt, my uncle, 2 cousins, and several other relatives were already sitting in the conference room when I arrived. Most of them hadn't visited my father in years. Some hadn't even attended family gatherings unless there was something to gain from it. Yet there they were, dressed in black, acting as though they had lost their best friend. I tried not to judge them. Grief affects people differently. The lawyer walked in carrying a folder. He offered condolences and began reading. The first few items were straightforward. Some personal belongings were designated to specific people. My father's watch, a few pieces of furniture, family photographs. Then the atmosphere changed. The lawyer cleared his throat and announced that the remainder of my father's estate, including his home, savings, investments, and other assets, would be transferred entirely to me. At first, I thought I had misunderstood. The room went silent. Then every head slowly turned toward me. The silence felt heavier than any argument I'd ever experienced. My aunt was the first to speak. She asked the lawyer to repeat what he had just said. He did, word for word. The estate was mine. Everything. My cousins looked stunned. One of them actually laughed because he assumed it was some kind of mistake, but the lawyer confirmed there had been no mistake. The will had been updated several years earlier and reviewed multiple times. My father knew exactly what he was doing. What happened next changed the way I looked at my family forever. The drive home was uncomfortable. My phone started vibrating before I even left the parking lot. One relative wanted to meet for coffee. Another wanted to discuss what my father really would have wanted. A third sent a message saying families should support each other during difficult times. By the time I got home, I already knew where this was heading. Within 48 hours, the requests began. At first, they sounded reasonable. One cousin said he was struggling financially and wondered whether I could help him out. Another suggested that sharing some of the inheritance would be the fair thing to do. My aunt claimed my father would never have wanted anyone to feel excluded. The strange part was how quickly grief disappeared from the conversation. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody talked about missing my father. Every discussion somehow returned to money. Then one evening my aunt called and said something I still remember word for word. She said, "You know that inheritance really belongs to the family, not just to you." That sentence stayed in my head. Because as far as I knew, my father had made his decision very deliberately. If he wanted the estate divided, he would have divided it. Instead, he left detailed instructions giving everything to me. I started wondering whether there was something I didn't know, something my father had never told me. A week later, things escalated. One of my cousins posted vague comments on social media about greed and betrayal. Another began contacting extended relatives to tell them I was refusing to honor my father's memory. Suddenly, people I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me with opinions about money that wasn't theirs. It felt surreal. I had gone from grieving my father to defending myself against accusations from people who barely knew me. Then something happened that changed everything. A few days later, the lawyer contacted me privately. He said there was additional information my father had requested be shared only if conflicts arose after his death. The moment he said that, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Because my father had anticipated this. Somehow he knew exactly what would happen. And according to the lawyer, there was a reason he made the decision he did. A reason that most of the family desperately hoped would never come to light. Then something happened that changed everything. A few days later, the lawyer contacted me privately. He said there was additional information my father had requested be shared only if conflicts arose after his death. The moment he said that, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Because my father had anticipated this. Somehow, he knew exactly what would happen. And according to the lawyer, there was a reason he made the decision he did. A reason that most of the family desperately hoped would never come to light. I met the lawyer the following afternoon. He handed me a sealed envelope with my father's handwriting on the front. Seeing his writing again hit me harder than I expected. For a few seconds, I couldn't even bring myself to open it. The lawyer quietly left the room to give me privacy. When I finally unfolded the letter, the first line stopped me cold. My father wrote that if I was reading the letter, it meant the family was already fighting over the inheritance. He said he hoped he was wrong, but doubted it. Then he explained something I had never fully understood growing up. For years, he had financially supported members of our family behind the scenes. He had paid off debts, covered medical bills, funded business ventures, and even rescued relatives from bankruptcy. Many of those same relatives, now demanding a share of the estate, had already received far more money from him than I ever knew. As I kept reading, the details became even more shocking. One cousin had borrowed a significant amount of money years earlier and never repaid it. My father forgave the debt. Another relative had received help buying a home. Someone else had been given money to save a failing business. Time after time, my father stepped in when family members needed help. But according to his letter, almost none of them ever expressed gratitude. Some even grew resentful when he stopped giving them money. The final pages explained why he left everything to me. He wrote that I was the only person who consistently showed up when there was nothing to gain. He said I visited him when he was lonely. I called him without needing favors. I helped him because I cared, not because I expected a reward. Reading those words was overwhelming. I sat there staring at the pages for several minutes. But the biggest revelation was still waiting near the end. My father revealed that he had deliberately kept records of every major financial gift he gave to family members over the years. Copies of those records were stored with the lawyer. If anyone attempted to challenge the will by claiming unfair treatment, documentation existed showing exactly how much support they had already received. Suddenly, everything made sense. My father knew there would be complaints. He knew people would claim he was unfair, and he prepared evidence to prove otherwise. I left the lawyer's office with mixed emotions. On one hand, I felt validated. On the other hand, I felt heartbroken. The letter revealed how disappointed my father had become with people he once trusted. Over the next few weeks, tensions escalated further. More relatives reached out. Some tried guilt. Others tried anger. A few attempted manipulation. One cousin insisted my father must have been confused when he changed the will. Another claimed I had somehow influenced him. The accusations became increasingly ridiculous. What frustrated me most was that none of them actually knew about the letter. They were making assumptions based entirely on what they wanted to believe. Eventually, I decided to stop arguing. Instead, I simply told everyone the will would be honored exactly as written. That answer did not go over well. Family gatherings became awkward. Some relatives stopped speaking to me entirely. Others launched what felt like a campaign to turn people against me. Stories started circulating. Apparently, I was selfish, greedy, manipulative. Depending on who was telling the story, I was either a mastermind who tricked my father or an ungrateful son who refused to share. It would have been funny if it weren't so exhausting. Then came the legal threat. One evening, I received a message informing me that several relatives were discussing ways to challenge the will. I wasn't entirely surprised. In fact, after reading my father's letter, I almost expected it. What surprised me was how confident they seemed. They genuinely believed they could overturn his wishes. When I informed the lawyer, he didn't look worried at all. In fact, he seemed almost amused. He reminded me that my father had worked with him for years while updating the estate plan. Every change was documented. Every decision was witnessed. Every legal requirement had been followed carefully. The chances of a successful challenge were extremely low. Still, the possibility hung over everything. Months passed while rumors spread. Some relatives stopped speaking to each other because they disagreed about how aggressively the situation should be handled. The inheritance wasn't just dividing the family from me, it was dividing the family from itself. Then, another piece of information surfaced. One of my older relatives reached out privately and asked to meet. She had known my father for decades and seemed uncomfortable about something. During our conversation, she revealed that the resentment within the family went back much further than I realized. According to her, many relatives had viewed my father as a financial safety net for years. Whenever someone made a bad decision, they expected him to fix it. Whenever money problems appeared, they looked to him for help. Over time, some family members stopped seeing his generosity as a gift and started seeing it as an obligation. Hearing that explanation changed my perspective. Suddenly, their reaction to the inheritance made more sense. They weren't angry because they had lost something they owned. They were angry because they believed they were entitled to future support that would never come. But the biggest twist was still ahead. Because while everyone was focused on the inheritance, another secret was quietly making its way toward the surface. A secret involving money, betrayal, and a decision my father made years before his death. And when that truth finally emerged, it completely changed the way the entire family saw one particular relative. A few weeks after that conversation, I received a phone call from the lawyer asking me to stop by his office again. His tone was different this time, more serious, more cautious. I assumed it was another update about the inheritance dispute, but when I arrived, he told me something I never expected to hear. During the process of organizing my father's records, additional documents had been reviewed. Most of them were financial records connected to the assistance he had provided family members over the years. But buried among those files was evidence of something far more significant. Years before his death, one of my relatives had secretly taken advantage of my father financially. At first, I didn't understand what he meant. My father was careful with money. He tracked everything. He noticed details. The idea that someone could manipulate him seemed unlikely. But as the lawyer explained the situation, the picture became clearer. A relative who had always presented himself as one of the most responsible members of the family had been quietly borrowing money for years under false pretenses. He repeatedly claimed he needed help for emergencies, business expenses, and family crises. In reality, much of the money had been spent on personal luxuries and risky investments. My father eventually discovered the truth. According to the records, there had been a major confrontation years earlier. The relative promised to repay everything and begged my father not to expose him to the rest of the family. My father agreed to keep the matter private because he didn't want to destroy relationships. But he never forgot it. More importantly, he never fully trusted that person again. Suddenly, certain parts of the inheritance made even more sense. The relative in question had been one of the loudest voices demanding a share of the estate. He constantly spoke about fairness, family unity, and honoring my father's memory. Yet behind the scenes, he had already taken advantage of my father's generosity for years. The hypocrisy was staggering. The lawyer explained that my father included references to the incident in his private records specifically because he feared the truth might become relevant after his death. He wasn't interested in revenge, he simply wanted facts preserved. I left that meeting feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to ignore the information entirely. Another part believed people deserved to know the truth, especially given the accusations being directed at me. For several days, I said nothing. Then, the situation exploded on its own. During a family gathering that I wasn't even attending, the inheritance became the main topic of conversation once again. According to multiple relatives, the same person who had secretly taken money from my father spent most of the evening criticizing me. He allegedly described me as selfish and undeserving. He argued that my father would be ashamed of the way I was handling the inheritance. Unfortunately for him, one of the people present already knew about the old financial records. The argument escalated quickly. What started as criticism of me suddenly turned into questions about his own behavior. At first, he denied everything. Then, details began emerging. The room reportedly went silent as more information surfaced. By the end of the evening, several family members were questioning stories they had believed for years. The fallout was immediate. Relationships that had existed for decades began unraveling almost overnight. Relatives started comparing notes. Old grievances resurfaced. Financial favors people had forgotten suddenly became relevant again. The inheritance dispute had opened a door that could no longer be closed. For the first time, attention shifted away from me. Instead, people became focused on understanding what had actually happened over the years. Some relatives who had previously criticized me reached out privately. A few apologized. Others admitted they never knew how much support my father had provided behind the scenes. One conversation stood out. A cousin called and confessed that he originally believed I was being unfair, but after learning more about the history, he realized my father had spent decades helping people who rarely appreciated it. That conversation meant more to me than I expected. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that not everyone was acting out of greed. Some people had simply been given incomplete information. Months continued to pass. The legal challenge everyone threatened never materialized. The more facts became known, the weaker their position looked. My father's planning had been thorough. His wishes were clear. The documentation was overwhelming. Eventually, even the most determined critics seemed to realize they had little chance of changing the outcome. But the most emotional moment came nearly a year after my father's death. While organizing boxes from his house, I found a collection of old photographs, letters, and personal notes. Hidden among them was another message addressed to me. Unlike the first letter, this one wasn't about money. It wasn't about family conflict. It wasn't about inheritance at all. It was simply a letter from a father to his son. He wrote about memories from my childhood, fishing trips, birthday parties, mistakes he regretted, moments he cherished. He talked about how proud he was of the person I had become. He thanked me for spending time with him during the final years of his life. Then he wrote something that stayed with me long after I finished reading. He said that people often reveal who they truly are when money enters the picture. Some become generous. Some become jealous. Some become angry. But eventually, the truth always surfaces. At that moment, I realized the inheritance had never really been the story. The money was simply the trigger. The real story was what it revealed about everyone involved. And there was still one final chapter left before the entire saga finally came to an end. The final chapter arrived almost 18 months after my father's death. By that point, the anger had cooled, the rumors had mostly faded, and the legal threats had disappeared completely. The inheritance was settled, the estate had been transferred. Life was beginning to feel normal again. For the first time since the reading of the will, I could go weeks without thinking about family drama. Then I received an unexpected invitation. A group of relatives wanted to meet for dinner. Under different circumstances, I probably would have declined. Too much had happened, too many things had been said. But something about the invitation felt different. There were no demands, no discussions about money, no pressure, just a request to sit down together. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. When I arrived, the atmosphere was nothing like the tense meetings of the previous year. People seemed older somehow, not physically, but emotionally. The conflict had taken a toll on everyone. Conversations started awkwardly. Nobody seemed quite sure where to begin. Eventually, one of my relatives broke the silence and apologized. Then another followed. Then another. Over the next hour, I heard admissions I never expected to hear. Some confessed they had allowed assumptions and gossip to influence their judgment. Others admitted they viewed my father primarily through the lens of what he could provide financially. A few acknowledged that they had mistaken generosity for obligation. Not everyone apologized. Some relationships were too damaged to fully recover. But enough people did that the evening felt meaningful. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about the inheritance. It was about accountability. It was about recognizing mistakes. It was about understanding how easily families can lose sight of what truly matters when money becomes involved. During the dinner, one relative said something that perfectly summarized the entire situation. She said that everyone spent so much time focusing on what my father left behind that they forgot to pay attention to who he actually was. That sentence hit me harder than I expected, because she was right. My father wasn't defined by his bank account, his house, or his investments. He was defined by decades of kindness, sacrifice, and support. Yet after his death, many people reduced his entire legacy to a financial transaction. Looking back, I realized that my father probably understood this would happen. That's why he planned so carefully. That's why he documented everything. That's why he left letters behind. He wasn't trying to punish anyone. He was trying to protect the truth. He knew that memories can be rewritten, emotions can be manipulated, and narratives can change. Facts are harder to erase. The inheritance had revealed uncomfortable realities about our family, but it also revealed something else. It showed me exactly who remained when money was removed from the equation. Some relatives disappeared the moment they realized they wouldn't benefit financially. Others slowly rebuilt relationships based on honesty rather than expectation. Those were the connections worth keeping. Eventually, I sold my father's house, not because I wanted to, but because holding on to it no longer felt right. Before the sale was finalized, I spent one last afternoon walking through the empty rooms. Every corner held memories. I remembered helping him repair the kitchen sink. I remembered watching old movies together in the living room. I remembered sitting at the dining room table while he told stories about his childhood. For a moment, the arguments, accusations, and inheritance battles disappeared. All that remained was gratitude. Gratitude for the time we had. Gratitude for the lessons he taught me. Gratitude that I was able to be there when he needed someone most. As I prepared to leave, I thought about the first day of the will reading. Back then, I believed the inheritance was a gift of money. I understand now that the real inheritance was something entirely different. My father left me clarity. He left me proof that character matters more than appearances. He left me a final lesson about human nature that I never would have learned otherwise. Most importantly, he left me the confidence to stop measuring relationships by obligation and start measuring them by genuine care. The money helped. It provided security. It created opportunities. But over time, it became one of the least important parts of the story. What mattered was understanding who truly loved my father, who valued him as a person, and who only valued what he could provide. That knowledge changed the way I viewed family forever. Today, when people ask whether the inheritance was worth all the conflict, I give the same answer every time. The conflict wasn't worth it. Losing family relationships wasn't worth it. The stress wasn't worth it. But learning the truth was. Because once the truth is revealed, you can finally stop living according to illusions. You can stop chasing approval from people who only appear when there's something to gain. You can stop feeling guilty for honoring someone's final wishes. And you can finally appreciate the people who stay beside you when there is absolutely nothing to inherit. In the end, my father's will didn't destroy our family. It exposed the cracks that had been there all along. The money didn't create greed. It revealed it. The inheritance didn't change people. It showed who they had always been. And that was the one thing my father wanted me to understand before he was gone.